I rode freights from town to town, from city to city, and it was by sheer luck that you got a job here and there, and it wasn't permanent, it was very temporary, because you used to get laid off, and then you get the freights and go again.
I can remember I had a real rough go. I was in Yorkton, Saskatchewan, and I was sleeping on the railway, alongside the railway on a pile of ties there, and I fell off of them, and oh, I split my ear. The ear was all blooded up in the side of my head. Of course, you just accepted these things. You didn't run to a doctor or first aid man. You didn't know what they were, but you just accepted that, and I was quite depressed. I think I felt quite sick over it. I got a good shaking, you know, and everything was going wrong for me. I was really broke. I wound up in the jungles there. I was just going to sleep, and I was doing a lot of reminiscence, you know, whether I should have stayed home, or was I better off at home, or where was all my friends? And, you know, I used to watch, you know, in these towns, the lights going out at 9, 10 o'clock at night. You know, people were going to bed in beds, and you were out in the wild blue yonder. You know, it was great at times, but it was depressing as all hell at other times, because I think people like to be with people, and you want to have something to lean on. We never had that. But anyway, back to this jungle, and I was hungry as hell, and there was this, well, I knew what he was now. He's a Ukrainian. He was just new to the country. He was big and strong. I can imagine he could get a job anywhere. One look at him and they'd hire him, and he was willing to work. And he had a hunk of bread, cheese, bologna, some butter, and he was cooking up tea, and he kept looking at me, and he couldn't even speak a word English, but the fact was he offered food to me and cleaned me up a little bit. He was a pretty good guy, and, you know, from then on I had, my views changed, you know. Previous to that, you're either a Catholic or a Protestant, and there was the goddamn Swedes, you know, and the Jews, and you took out your misfortunes or the way things were. They were bad for everybody, and instead of looking for what was wrong with everything, you were attacking each other. And if it wasn't for the bloody Swedes, we'd have a job. If it wasn't for the bohunks taking all our jobs, like this big guy, he could get a job. That was a job you couldn't get. And, well, you were making these excuses. But after that, I found out they were just about all people in the same boat.
There were other people in the same boat. Despite the fact that Alfonso XIII had abdicated in 1931 and a democratic republic had been formed, Spain was still a desperately poor country. The new government had built 9,000 schools in 2 years. It had redistributed 12 million acres of land to the landless peasants. But the reforms were too little for the left, and for the right, everything had gone too far. The landowners, the military, and the all-powerful Catholic Church stubbornly resisted any change. In the Western democracies, people were looking for alternatives. For many, the capitalist system didn't work anymore. It denied them work. It robbed them of their dignity. The alternatives had to be extreme ones. People didn't want solutions. They wanted salvation. Only the extreme left or the extreme right promised paradise on earth. Hitler could boast that Germany had no unemployment and no rioting in the streets. Mussolini made the trains of Italy run on time and talked of reviving the Roman Empire. To anti-fascists, the Soviet Union seemed to be the only bastion against Hitler. Stalin tried to project an image of a strong, unified workers' state, where instead of a depression, there was full employment. Instead of abandoned homesteads, there were happy collective farms. In place of an exploiting ruling class, the people owned everything. On his return from Moscow, American journalist Lincoln Steffens declared, "I've seen the future. and it works. The strong anti-fascist stand of the Soviet Union gave prestige to the communist movement. To many Canadians in the 30s, it seemed like an attractive alternative. If the Canadian government was wary of fascism, it was horrified of communism. Conservative Prime Minister R.B. Bennett saw communist conspirators behind every protest against his government's policies. But he had to face the fact that 1.5 million Canadians were out of work.
But so aid in its growth and development as to secure employment for our own people and the establishment of permanent homes throughout the country.
The government's solution was the establishment of relief camps. Set up in 1932 and administered by the Army under the King's rules and regulations, they provided bunkhouses and 3 meals a day. Applicants were required to be single, homeless, unemployed, and willing to work.
Well, first of all, you received 20 cents a day. And for that, you had to work 8 hours with a pick and shovel building a highway.
They gave us old Army fatigue uniforms and boots. We just used to do everything manually. We used picks, shovels.
Pick and shovel and wheelbarrows. It was really something. To build a road that way was impossible, and any rock work was done with hand steel. There was very little done because we were all kids, and we never knew how to use these things and never had any intentions. At 20 cents a day, you know.
Here he is, 21, 19, 20, 21 years old, and he's faced with a life that he has no chance at all. He's a forgotten individual, a forgotten person. And this he refused to accept.
Oh, it was a honey, absolute honey for the communists. A group of idle or under-occupied young men who had suffered the indignities of unemployment for months and months and months, all collected together. Woof, the audience had been collected for the communists.
You knew who they were because the approach to join, I think, was the Relief Camp Workers Union. Yeah, that was it. And you joined. What else could you do? They were the only people who were willing to go along with you, and they offered you ideas which were good. You know, 40 cents an hour, man, you could almost live like a human being, you know.
In April 1935, the relief camps in British Columbia went on strike. The strikers assembled in Vancouver and stated their demands. 50 cents an hour, adequate first aid, unemployment insurance, and the right to vote.
We weren't getting anywhere in Vancouver, and somebody got the brainwave we should all go to Ottawa.
Well, the Ottawa trek was an accident, primarily an accident. We had exhausted most of our facilities to continue to strike in Vancouver, but the longshoremen, they come out on strike in the midst of the whole problem. And the government of British Columbia was quite willing to see us out of town so they could handle the longshore situation. They provided the trains, the freight, which we rode on, and there was no handicap, no problem at all on getting on this seaboard, 1010 seaboard freight going right through. The men in the camps, they were quite willing to carry the question right to the Dominion government of Canada in Ottawa. Quite willing to do that.
The trekkers were on their way to Ottawa. About the same time in Spain, one crisis followed another. Political assassinations by the left and the right became an everyday occurrence. With general strikes, separatist uprisings, and the vacillations of an increasingly powerless government, Spain was heading for total anarchy. The stage was set for the inevitable showdown.
Hold the fort, for we are coming.
On the Canadian prairies, there was another showdown. The march on Ottawa reached Regina, where it ended in violence.
Victory will come.
Oh, the Regina riot. Well,